Once the project has launched, we need to start with exercise 1. So you'll need to go and have a look at your example. So I've given you a block. So typically you get this information from online resources. But for example, I got this person from My Drawings. It's an open source location where you can download these blocks. So you can see you get top, elevation. So just remember for trees, okay, some of them you won't get top and elevation, so just be careful. But if you hover on these objects, you can download these as DWG. So you can download this information and you can follow this workflow to create your own library. Now typically in Revit, you want to avoid adding too many 3D objects like people, very complex objects like people, trees. It'll just slow down Revit and make your models if you don't have a very powerful machine, it's just going to make your models very difficult to work with. There are other workflows which we'll cover on how to do that, but for now, try and use 2D objects. We'll use a lot more 2D objects rather than 3D objects in certain circumstances, okay? But the idea is to get comfortable drafting so that when you come to modeling, these two items will work together. So drafting and modeling work together, okay? Now, for exercise 1, I've given you a file that we need to convert into a block. Okay, so typically when we're drafting, annotate, you see that we start using detail lines. Remember, detail lines are 2D lines. We've got a series of line types that we need to stick to. Okay, so we need to set these up correctly. Now, when we're drafting, when we want to put 2D objects in, it's slightly different. If we go to components, you'll see by default there's going to be a series of built-in components that we need to use. Okay, so these are difficult to see, so you'll need to name them, but once you've used one or two, it will make a lot more sense. Okay, so straightforward, what we need to do is we need to make a detail component. The reason why we want to make a detail family or a component is so that when we're putting details together, we don't have to, when you're drafting objects, moving objects around, it gets very difficult. You want to convert all of these into one object so they're easier to work. So unlike other software, you've got to use an external tool to do that. So you'll need to go to File, you'll need to go to New, Family, and by default it should open up in this location. So if you see Revit templates, you should have these different languages. Just note that we use the English library and it should be the metric English library. Okay, this will be a generic detail item. Detail items are drafting items, so you'll need to go to generic detail item. So detail item. So what this does is it creates it opens up another environment where we create detail items. You can still draft, you can still add a lot of information here. In another exercise, we'll get to how to do that. Okay. Now, in order to use that CAD information, we'll need to go to Insert, Import CAD. Now I need to go and find that CAD file. So just remember, you need to download this to where you're working. I'm going to import this, and I know that this needs to be millimeters because I've tested it and I know that's a millimeters drawing. You can also use auto. Sometimes it does come with a bit of a catch. Just say correct slightly. You can switch that off for now, and you're going to say orientate to view. Internal origin to internal origin is fine. Press open. Okay. So what this will do, it'll bring in this object into your. Okay. Now by default, these objects are pinned, so you might just have to unpin this function, and you might have to unpin this object. So by default, when they come in, they pin, so just make sure that you switch this option on and off. Okay, pinned objects just can't be deleted or moved. Okay, so I'm going to move this object now. So you can move this again, so you can use the move command, and you can use an endpoint maybe, snap end maybe. Okay, it's, for now, doesn't really matter. Just try and move it to a location where it's kind of central to these reference planes. These are reference planes, so in essence when you pull this object into Revit, that's its base point. Okay, so if you select a reference plane and properties, you'll see it will tell you define origin, but these are typically built in. You can't delete them, by the way, because they're pinned. Okay, now that we've got an imported object, just double check if you measure just to make sure that it's the correct height. So if you're not sure of the units, I just always measure these, and that's correct height for a person. She's quite tall, but anyway, that's fine. For now, for what we're creating. Okay, so we've got a few items that we need to do in this family. The first thing you need to do is fully explode this drawing. So what it'll do, it'll make the line work it'll form part of the drawing now. So if I go to manage and I go to object styles, now all of a sudden in object styles it would have created these two new line types. Okay, so now this is very important to understand. In order to get this to represent correctly in Revit, I'll explain once I load the project in and explain what's going on, but in essence, all you've got to understand, the outer line, we can change that. Now, if you're going to use the same blocks, if you're going to use BIM objects again, you might want to maintain this, and later on I'll explain why. But for now, the outer line, I'm going to make it line white 2, and I'm going to make this black. Okay, it just means that I can control it once it's in the project. The inner lines are going to make that 1, I'm going to make this gray. So in essence, this is like a hatch line. This will form or become like a hatch line in essence. If I press apply now, you notice that it changes this information. Okay, so we're working scale 1 to 10. Doesn't matter, the scale doesn't really influence for now. In Revit as well, you'll see that the scale is preset for the view. So don't worry about the scale for now. Okay, but in essence, you can see this is starting to look pretty good. Now, in order to get a gray fill at the back, so if we go back to our example, in order to get that gray fill, the last step that we need to do is we'll need to go create, and we'll need to create a filled region. Not a masking region, we'll need to create a filled region. Now, to create a filled region, you can simply trace the outline now, and I'll explain why that we can. So this pick line, sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't. So if it doesn't, what I recommend you do is exit the command, and I'm going to cut this line work just like this. I'm going to select the line work and I'm going to use the cut function, cut it away. Then I'm going to start I know that it's on the correct layer, so I'm going to go to full region. Now, in order to create the correct full region, I'm going to say edit type. I'm going to duplicate this concrete, duplicate, and I'm just going to call this background for now. It just means that we can use this again and again. So I'm not going to say I'm going to switch it off from being masking, because sometimes you want it to mask objects and sometimes you don't. So maybe just make it mask. I want to pick a correct full pattern, and this will be a solid color. I can ignore the background color for now because I'm not using another layer or another type of hatch. I'm going to make this quite gray, so quite dull. So just pick a color that works for you. I'm going to press apply and press OK. Now, it's asking for some line work, and I can say outer, but because I can use the paste function, I'm going to say align to current view. Because I had line work there originally, it will now work. Now, provided that these bits of line work are joined, and I press the finish command, it should create the shade. Okay, and it will give you the correct outline. So let's just double check that. So boundary, make sure this line work, it was outer. So if you're unsure of the outer line work, just make sure that you select the correct line type for it to work for the family. Okay. Now you'll notice that this full region will sit above everything. You just need to tell the full region to go to back. So send to back. So you're going to say send to back. Send backwards. If this does happen, this line work, sometimes what happens is when we take in line work from another object, so if I select everything and I use the full command and I check none and I go detail items or lines inner, what happens is from an AutoCAD file, these lines don't work correctly. So you need to convert them. They need to become like a 2D bit of line. When I've just noticed when they come from AutoCAD, sometimes there's a bit of a glitch. So you need to convert them to detail lines. Okay, you see that here you can convert to model lines. So you want to do it in the opposite direction. Okay, so these must become symbolic line work. There's a strict reason why these things need to become symbolic line work. Now that I've created the object, you need to go and say File, Save As, Family. So I want you to save this family. You're going to need to upload it for me. So in your workshop folder, you're going to call this person. So you need to save this as a person, and you're going to press save. Then you're going to say load into project. Load into project. Now it'll allow me to load this into the project. Now as you load it into the project, you'll notice this comes in perfectly. And now at any point I can change this to a different type of object. Okay, so they're all working around that base point. That's important. important. You can simply type in person at the top here to find your person's library, but you can see now when you pull this information in, it comes correctly. So for exercise 1, it's pretty straightforward. You need to create a detail item family and you need to import it into your file. Remember, you'll need to upload that. So in your workshop folder, those families, you'll need to upload this family for me as well. So just pay attention to how big these families do get. So imagine if you had to draft a whole lot of this information or use lots of these, your Revit project file gets quite large quickly. Okay. Alright, so that's it for exercise 1.